Hello. All right, so this lecture will be on interviewing methods. We talked about this a little bit on past videos, but specifically when we're doing, human performance investigations, right? A lot of times the circumstances surrounding an interview can be very stressful for the participant. So there are very specific ways to approach these things when you're, trying to figure out what happened or what went wrong in a way that doesn't make it totally feel like an interrogation. So first, what is an interview? And you have this definition here. It's a form of communication. At least one of the two parties has a preconceived and serious purpose, and it involves the asking and answering of questions. It's more formal than a conversation. Note taking plays a huge part, and the point is to gather information. Now, that note taking one is incredibly critical. If possible or allowed in your specific domain or area of practice, you should record these interviews as much as possible. But and I will say, even if you do record it, though, you still need to be engaged in note taking. This can often be a situation where having a partner or somebody else in the room as well can be helpful. So 4 key elements to a good interview. First, preparation. So when we look at that, right, especially in a human performance event investigation style approach, you should know as much as possible about not just the event, but also about the kind of like the known good. So what would have been the correct way that this should have went, what's the standard operations, all of those things. You should have a very good understanding of this overall process before you ever even walk into the room. And with that, we'll get into this in a little bit, but bear in mind that your knowledge and preparation isn't necessarily ironclad, right? You may have information that you received from leadership or other folks that maybe isn't totally accurate. So it's important that you focus on the preparation in a way to ensure that the interview is valuable over trying to correct misunderstandings. Then opening. So this is kind of first impressions. This is how you set this up in a way that will get the person talking. We'll discuss a questioning process and then a closing. It is kind of a structured setup and kind of by design for this, especially if you're doing an event investigation. You're going to be doing a lot of these interviews with a lot of different people, and so having a set process is very critical to ensure that you don't sway anybody or impact the interview's validity in any way. So when we talk about preparation, right, you should make sure you have your timeline sketched, a list of potential interviewees, develop your list of questions. Now, there may be opportunities during the interview where you may stray a bit from those questions. You need to follow up or dig into a topic, but you should know the way it's going to go. There's that old saying with lawyers that a good lawyer never asks a question they don't already know the answer to. You then want to build an error-free scenario to compare the deviation in information. It's a little bit of like a change analysis type thing, but it's very valuable in this so that you can approach the situation and look at the individual you're interviewing and say, okay, my understanding is the process should have went this way, and it deviated here, and that's how we got the event. What do you think? Those kind of things. So be mindful of your environment. Plan most of your questions. So this I just talked about was like structured versus non-structured questions. There's not like a hard and fast rule, but I'd say a good 80 to 20 minute. If you look at the minutes of an interview, right, 80% of that time should be spent probably on structured questions. If it's more unstructured, then you either probably lost a little bit of control in the interview or your preparation wasn't thorough enough. You need to allow time between interviews. That's another critical one. Do not shuffle somebody out the room and then bring in the next person. You want to be able to kind of have that time right after an interview to kind of deconstruct, make sure your notes are up to date, verify the recording worked, and make any follow-up notes. That time is incredibly important, not just from like the logistics of it all, but in terms of your memory and being able to be effective in that. So if you take that a little bit of time after the fact, you'll be able to remember more of that interview instance if you need to recall it after the fact. And you can develop a shorthand as needed. This can be super helpful, especially if you are dealing with like a very complex situation where there might be a lot of acronyms, so there's a lot of different jargony things. So developing your own shorthand so that you are able to take notes quickly and still maintain the information can be super helpful. So opening. This is the most important part of the actual interview. So you're going to set the tone, define the scope and intent, and first impressions are important when we look at this. So the 3 critical steps to the opening. You should put the interviewee at ease, orient the interviewee to the purpose, and establish your credibility. So an example, you can come in, right? People might be thinking it's like a meeting with the Bobs from Office Space and they're going to get fired at the end of it. Typically in event investigation scenarios, right, we often don't have authority to fire anybody. So it's important to stress that that's outside of your purview. That's a HR concern. Your concern is just trying to figure out what happened and what can be fixed to make sure it doesn't happen again. You also want to orient the interviewee to the purpose of the interview, right? We're not trying to find blame. We're not trying to find, which person did the wrong thing so we can axe them out. We want to find the truth. And it's good to present that almost as you're on a fact-finding mission with these people. And these people are within this organization, within this context. They're your guides. And so being able to establish that and, saying things like, I think I have a good understanding of this, but I'll ask some questions and stuff that might seem kind of silly, but, a lot of times it's just making sure that I understand it right. And so I'm trying to, get like an insider's view. People love being the experts in any conversation. So that is an incredibly powerful way to help kind of just set that tone. And then you establish your credibility, right? You were brought in for whatever reason to do these things. You don't have to give them your resume, right? But stress that you've done this before, and that it's not as big of a deal. Because for them, it probably is an incredibly big deal. But if you're doing a lot of event investigations, you see enough of them, right? They're all important in their own way, but they're also, they have similarities, right, that are valuable for us and help it be less kind of urgently stressful. All right, so stuff that for the interviewee specifically. So you want to have an overview of the material to be covered. We're going to cover process XYZ when you're doing this task in this environment. Give direct answers to any questions. No opinions. We don't want them editorializing like, oh, well, we're supposed to do this, but so-and-so is a bad supervisor and all this stuff. Like, none of that's super valuable unless you notice a trend or you're trying to pick up, organizational personnel problems. Maybe it could be valuable, but you don't want to fall too far down the rabbit hole and have it turn just into a gripe session. If you don't know the answer to a question they ask, you say so, and then you provide the answer later. This is incredibly important for them, especially that you follow up and provide the answer later. Don't just say you're going to do it, actually do it. That helps establish your credibility in this space with the team, everything. It'll help make your life a lot easier. And here are some things that you might get asked, and you do need to prepare for this and have an answer. So what will you do with what I tell you? Depending on your situation and the nature of this event, there might be very specific answers to that question. Or it could just be, well, it all feeds in, everybody's feedback goes into a report, but maybe it won't be identifying or whatever. It kind of depends on your process, but be clear with what that's going to be for them. Similarly, will my name be used? Are you going to be anonymizing the interview data or not? How long will this take? And why me? That's an important thing, right? This is, on each of these is an opportunity to kind of reinforce everything from the opening. So kind of keep that in mind as you're going through. So 2 specific big kind of categories of questions are open and closed, leading, or neutral. So open questions, broad, the interviewee is free to answer how they think. It communicates a level of interest and trust. When we ask an open question, the other person tends to feel that we are interested and trust their opinion, and that's why we're giving them, right, the leeway. Closed, they limit answers. These are like your yes or no questions, and you may need to follow up to get the whole picture, and can seem interrogatory. So it's important to kind of balance these two, right? And there's a couple different strategies that we'll talk about for those. And leading or neutral. So leading question, again, if you've ever watched Law and Order, asking a question that assumes an answer is what a leading question is. So that kind of sounds weird in lawyer speak, so I'll break that down. This one, don't you think we need more engineers? What is assumed by that question? That somebody thinks we don't have enough engineers. I don't know who, but the reason that you would say that is because you are trying to maybe get there, right? And again, what it does, and what's a problem for you as an interviewer trying to find the truth, people are way more likely to just say yes, because inherent in that question is a social assumption about their coworkers. Somebody thinks that there's not enough engineers. So people like to agree with other people, typically. I mean, who knows? Maybe you'd talk to an engineer and they'd be like, nope, we have too many. But you want to kind of be aware of that. That doesn't mean you don't use leading questions. It just means they're very specific cases. And the neutral would be the how do you feel about the number of engineers, right? All that communicates is that there's an interest somewhere about the number of engineers. Not that it's too high, not that it's too low, not that there is a number. You're just trying to explore those. So when we look at questioning strategies, these are the 2. We have a funnel or inverted funnel, very innovative naming situations here. So these aren't necessarily required, but they can be a very natural way to plan the interview. So experiment, kind of see in the context, the structure of your questioning will change this, but it's important to always keep in mind that closed questions can lead to open, and open can lead to closed in very specific ways that feel natural. And it's important to kind of just spend some time thinking about how you expect this information gathering to go so that you can be effective in what you're needing to do. So some folks like to open up the question to start with, ask very broad questions, and then slowly close the questions as you dig into everything they say. So if they say, oh, that didn't work because of A, B, and C reason, and then you would break out A, B, and C into separate question strategies that you may be closing off to eventually get to a yes or no kind of structure with any remaining or like leftover questions or mysteries about the process that you need to solve. Vice versa, you can start with closed questions and then move to open. A common way of this, that this manifests right in our conversations, is when we ask some questions and then we ask follow-ups. So, oh, you said this, can you explain that more? Or those kind of things. That's an closed to open style structure. So again, you don't necessarily have to do only one. You don't have to follow any. There's no specific like guideline here. It's just something to be aware of as you structure your interviews. Now, I would say for the interviewer, the most important thing is to listen, and that seems pretty obvious, but a lot of people struggle with it, right? So I'm just going to kind of, I'd recommend pausing this and just kind of reading through this and looking over kind of how you do this. A lot of this is about the environment. When we look at like audible distractions or some of those kind of things, you want to minimize those for sure. But a lot of it really is about the interviewer. So, you know, we ask a question and we wait. And sometimes that waiting is uncomfortable. Silence can be awkward. But you need to do that. You need to listen to the answer before you make a judgment. This is something that you will likely struggle with and need to practice to get better with. Don't walk in with any preconceived notions. Now, this might seem kind of counter to when I say you have to like prepare significantly. Preparation is not the same as judgments. So preparation is understanding the way this thing is supposed to happen, the way it did happen, the people involved, what the people did. It's all very fact-based. There shouldn't, and those are just, that's from the information you have, but you're more than willing to be wrong. And that's important to have that vibe so that people don't think they need to adhere to some kind of story or comply with some guideline, but they can be honest. And then just evaluate every response for logic, clarity, and accuracy. So you're going to want to really be specific about their thought process, which may not be logical when you look at it, but that's where we follow up and we ask questions and we try to get to an understanding there. All right, and then the closeout. These are very, very important steps. They bookend the opening. If you have a strong opening but you don't close, then the whole thing just feels weird and is not going to be effective, and that understanding will pervade the entire process, and so that person's going to walk out the door, and regardless of if it was a good conversation, it ended strange, so their final kind of assumption about it will be strange, and that's what's going to get to all of their coworkers and team members. So you want to ask them if they know anything they could have done or would do differently if they were faced with the task again to avoid the negative results. Now, this is important. Don't do this early in the interview. Wait till closer to the end to ask this specific question, because otherwise what it will do is that person's going to call up an optimal or exemplar scenario or process that they followed, and that's going to taint all of their answers. So that's why we leave this for the end, because it forces them to briefly reflect on the conversation, on everything they had said, and then, you know, it's not going to bias any more questions, but you can get kind of a final kind of touch point at the end of that sentence of just, okay, this is what I would have done. You want to summarize what you learned from the interviewee and give them a general idea of what comes next. So, I'm meeting with 10 more people, and then I have to get this report in within the next few weeks, and I don't know what will happen after that from the organizational perspective, but they'll have my report by X date. You also want to thank them for helping and tell them that it might be necessary to contact them again and make sure that that is all right. And then give them your contact info so that they may contact you if they have questions or if they recall anything else, because this will be a pretty jarring experience for them. It's going to be on their mind for a while, so it's important to give them a way of handling that uncertainty so it doesn't just kind of infect their overall perceptions. And one thing on here I'd say is missing is you want to also ask if there's anybody else that you should speak with. Like, is there anybody else? You know, you've got a list, but, you know, again, remember, they're the experts. So, hey, you're in the environment. Who else has like an opinion or will know anything about the way this goes? And you'd be surprised some of the answers you get, but definitely follow them up. You never know where really great information will spawn from. So you'll take accurate notes, listen to the answers, don't interrupt. If somebody says something that doesn't make sense, you wait until they're done with that and then follow up or call back to that point, but you do not interrupt them in the moment. Use the timeline or the matrix of information to guide your questioning. If appropriate, go to the location where the problem occurred and do an actual walkthrough with the interviewee. That can be incredibly powerful if it's possible to walk them through that. There are certain things that happen to our memory when we're in a space trying to recall something that happened there. Makes it more accurate. And ask them if this is the first time this has ever happened, because that also can be super valuable when you get into corrective action space. All right, that's all. Thanks.